Dana White stood at that podium and said something he almost never says about any fighter on his roster. "I'm not even thinking about him fighting again." From the man who books rematches before the blood has dried on the canvas, who fast-tracks injured fighters back onto cards with weeks of notice, that single sentence told the entire MMA world more about the severity of Ilia Topuria's condition than any medical report that followed. Start with the moment itself, because the urgency in how it was handled was unlike anything this sport typically produces. White had Topuria out of the octagon and on his way to a local hospital before Justin Gaethje's hand was even raised in victory. Not after the ceremony. Not after the interviews. Before the official decision was even formally announced. That is not standard procedure for a fighter who lost a close decision or absorbed a rough round. That is what happens when the people closest to a situation see something with their own eyes that makes waiting around for protocol feel genuinely dangerous. At the press conference, White did not soften any of it. He said Topuria was busted up, that he was not a doctor but that the eye looked like a probable broken orbital. He was careful to caveat that he was only assuming. He turned out to be right, except it was both eyes, not one. The sequence of how Gaethje actually took Topuria apart deserves careful examination because it did not happen the way most fights end. It happened methodically, round by round, with damage compounding on top of damage in a way that does not always show up clearly on a scorecard but absolutely shows up on a CT scan. Topuria started exactly as everyone expected. Sharp, dangerous, nearly finishing Gaethje in the second round with vicious body shots that put the underdog in genuine trouble on the canvas. The crowd was fully behind him. The momentum belonged to him completely. And then it flipped, because Gaethje knew something about his own preparation that the oddsmakers had not properly accounted for. He explained it himself afterward, that he knew he had to survive the early rounds, that Topuria's skills were unmatched when fresh, but that his own durability and tenacity would carry him through, and that nobody could outwork him once the fight reached the championship rounds. That was the entire strategic premise. Survive the storm. Let the fight come to him. And it executed exactly according to plan. The specific moment that started everything unraveling for Topuria was a single uppercut Gaethje landed in close quarters during a clinch exchange. That shot opened the swelling around Topuria's right eye, and in a fight like this, once swelling begins around the eye socket, it compounds with every subsequent punch that lands in that same area. There was a genuine turning point buried inside the second round that deserves specific attention. After hurting Gaethje badly with those body shots and putting him on the canvas, Topuria chose to pursue a submission on the ground rather than staying on his feet and finishing the striking assault that had clearly hurt his opponent. That decision may have been the single moment that changed the entire trajectory of the fight, because the Gaethje who got back up off that canvas was a different fighter than the one who went down. Colder. More deliberate. And from that point forward, he started landing consistently. By the third round, Topuria was visibly slowing. Exactly the kind of position no fighter wants to be in against a man who has built his entire career on wars of attrition. Gaethje knocked him down and stunned him repeatedly, just minutes after nearly being finished himself. The damage accumulating on Topuria's face had become severe enough that the ringside doctor seriously considered stopping the fight before round 4 even began. Topuria protested. He demanded to continue, with both eyes visibly deteriorating and, according to multiple accounts, a bone visibly displaced beneath the skin on the right side of his face. He looked that doctor directly in the eye and said he was not finished. Gaethje closed the fourth round with a devastating knee to the body as Topuria worked his way back to his feet. Topuria made it back to his corner standing. His own coaching team looked at what they were seeing happen to his face in real time and made the decision themselves. They threw in the towel. Not because Topuria quit. By several accounts, he was arguably winning portions of that fourth round on pure will alone, but because his own corner could see something happening to the structure of his face that made allowing a fifth round unconscionable, regardless of how much fight he had left in him. When the medical report finally came through days later, it confirmed and then exceeded what most analysts had braced themselves for. Non-displaced fractures to both orbital bones. Not one. Both. The right eye absorbed the majority of the damage, which lines up directly with Topuria's own account that he lost vision in that eye during the very first round. That means he fought through a fractured orbital bone for nearly the entire fight, from almost the opening minute, and kept competing at the highest level of professional violence for 3 additional rounds with a broken bone surrounding his eye socket. Because the fractures were non-displaced, meaning the bone fragments stayed in proper alignment rather than shifting out of place, surgery was not required. That is genuinely the best possible outcome available given the severity of what actually happened. But do not let that clinical good news soften the underlying reality. The swelling that ultimately forced the stoppage was not surface trauma. It was broken bone tissue swelling outward, physically closing his eyes from the inside as the fight progressed. Topuria's own statement, posted to Instagram the morning after, remains one of the more remarkable pieces of athlete communication this sport has produced in recent memory, specifically because of what it did not contain. No excuses. No complaints about a compromised camp. No blame directed at the officials or the doctor who almost stopped the fight. He wrote directly to Gaethje, "You said you'd leave your mark on my face, and you did." He confirmed the exact sequence: sight gone from his right eye in round 1, his left eye gone by the end of round 2. He called it one of the best training camps of his career and said simply that the night belonged to Gaethje. And then, in the same composed message, he promised he would return stronger, wiser, and more dangerous, and that this story between them was far from finished. Understanding why this specific loss carries the weight it does requires understanding exactly what Topuria had built before that night. He was born in Germany to Georgian parents who had fled conflict in Abkhazia. At 7, the family returned to Georgia, where he began Greco-Roman wrestling. After the Russo-Georgian War, the family relocated again to Alicante, Spain, 3 countries of displacement before he was even old enough to drive. He found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there, became one of the first Georgians to earn a black belt in the discipline alongside his brother Alexander in 2018, turned professional in 2015, and entered the UFC in October 2020 without ever losing again. 8 straight wins. A reputation building specifically around a moment against Jai Herbert in 2022 where he got dropped hard, climbed off the canvas, and finished his opponent anyway, the exact blueprint of resilience that defined his identity until the White House. He told the world he would knock out Alexander Volkanovski in the 2nd round before that fight even happened. He did exactly that, ending a 4-year title reign with a single short right hand. He finished Charles Oliveira in the 1st round to become the first undefeated 2-division champion in UFC history. 17 wins, 0 losses, 3 former champions finished in succession: Volkanovski, Holloway, Oliveira, heading into a White House main event where he entered as more than a 6-to-1 betting favorite against a 37-year-old many considered past his competitive peak. Justin Gaethje becomes, with this win, the first fighter to defeat an undisputed UFC lightweight champion since Conor McGregor beat Eddie Alvarez a full decade earlier in 2016. 10 years between upsets of that specific magnitude at 155 pounds. And the man who finally broke that streak was written off by most of the sport heading into fight week. Here is where things stand as the dust settles. Despite the loss, Topuria remains ranked number 1 in the UFC lightweight division and 5th in the pound-for-pound rankings, which tells you everything about how dominant his reign actually was, that a single brutal loss did not immediately erase his positioning. Gaethje has been cool publicly on the idea of an immediate rematch, framing his win as decisive and pointing out that he made Topuria quit on the stool. Topuria's camp sees a fundamentally different version of the same 4 rounds. A man who could not see, stopped by his own corner specifically to prevent permanent structural damage to his face. Those 2 competing narratives of the exact same fight are precisely what will make a rematch, whenever it happens, one of the most anticipated in the division's history. In the meantime, the machine keeps moving regardless of Topuria's recovery timeline. Dana White has already booked Dustin Poirier for another shot at Gaethje, rather than waiting on an immediate rematch. And Topuria himself is reportedly expected to face Conor McGregor in Dublin in November as part of his own comeback campaign, a fight that gives him an opportunity to rebuild momentum quickly while his body finishes healing from injuries that, by any honest medical standard, should keep him out of competition considerably longer than typical UFC matchmaking timelines usually allow. The recovery period for orbital fractures typically runs anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks for initial healing, extending to several months before a fighter can safely return to full contact competition. And even once healed, those bones do not return to full original strength. They heal with what amounts to structural memory of having been broken, meaning every opponent Topuria faces from this point forward will have specific information about exactly where his face is now more vulnerable than it used to be. What remains genuinely undiminished, regardless of how the recovery unfolds, is the body of work that got him to that White House lawn in the first place. 17 wins. Victories over Volkanovski, Holloway, and Oliveira. 3 men who were each considered effectively unbeatable in their own right before Topuria finished all 3 of them in succession. That foundation does not disappear because of one brutal night, no matter how severe the damage or how uncertain the timeline back. The question that actually matters now is not whether Ilia Topuria fights again. By every indication from the man himself, he absolutely will. The question is what kind of fighter walks back into that octagon, and whether the version of him that refuses to ever stop, the exact quality that built an unbeaten record across nearly a decade, is the same quality that nearly cost him something far more permanent than a title on that South lawn.